Imagine. The quiet life of a 40-year-old engineer is destroyed in an instant when his 16-year-old daughter accuses him of a crime he did not commit. 10 years in prison, family betrayal, and the fight for justice. This is the story of Peter Crawford, where each twist and turn is more shocking than the last. Peter Crawford woke up every morning with a quiet sense of gratitude. At 40, he had built a steady life in Boston. A civil engineer with a solid job at a reputable firm, a modest house in a tree-lined suburb, and a family he cherished. His wife, Emily, was the steady heartbeat of their home, a woman whose warmth and patience had carried them through 18 years of marriage. Their daughter, Sophia, was 16, bright, headstrong, and, until recently, the light of Peter's world. Life wasn't perfect, but it was predictable, and that suited him just fine. Mornings followed a familiar rhythm: coffee brewing, the hum of the news on the kitchen radio, and blueprints spread across the table as he prepped for work. Emily would bustle around, packing lunches or nagging Sophia to get ready for school. Sophia, though, had changed lately. The girl who once chattered about her day now hid behind her phone, her answers clipped and her eyes distant. Peter chalked it up to teenage rebellion. Every parent went through it, right? It was a Thursday evening when the first crack appeared. The three of them sat at the dinner table, the clink of forks against plates filling the silence. Emily tried to spark conversation. "Sophia, how was school?" she asked, her tone light but edged with effort. "Fine," Sophia muttered, not looking up from her phone. Peter frowned. "Put that down for a minute. Sophomore, tell us something. Anything." She sighed, dramatic and exaggerated, then dropped the bomb. "I'm going out with Zach tonight." Peter froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "Zach? As in Zach Davis?" "Yes-o." Sophia shot back, her chin jutting out defiantly. Emily glanced at Peter, reading the tension in his jaw. Zach Davis was trouble, 19, with a rap sheet that included petty theft, vandalism, and rumors of worse. Peter had seen him once, leaning against a beat-up car downtown, smirking like he owned the world. Every instinct screamed that this kid was bad news. "I don't want you hanging out with him," Peter said, his voice low but firm. Sophia's eyes flashed. "You don't get to decide that. I'm not a kid anymore." "Yes, you are," he snapped. "And while you're under my roof." "Peter," Emily cut in, her hand on his arm. "She's just testing boundaries. Let's not fight." But Sophia didn't wait for peace. She shoved her chair back, the scrape echoing through the room, and stormed off. "You're such a control freak," she yelled before slamming her bedroom door. Peter stared at Emily, who gave him that tired, placating smile. "She'll cool off," she said. "You know how she is." He nodded, but something gnawed at him, an unease he couldn't name. The air felt heavier, like a storm was brewing just out of sight. The next morning, Sophia barely spoke. She grabbed her backpack and left for school without a goodbye. Peter watched her go, the pit in his stomach growing. At work, he tried to focus on bridge schematics, but his mind kept drifting back to Zach. He'd heard stories, whispers of fights, a stolen car, a kid left bleeding on the sidewalk. Was Sophia just a phase for him, or was something more dangerous? That night, she didn't come home until late. Peter waited up, pacing the living room. When she finally slipped through the door, her hoodie smelled faintly of smoke. "Where were you?" he demanded. "With friends," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Zach's not your friend, Sophia. He's trouble." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You don't know him. Stop acting like you're perfect." "I'm trying to protect you," he shot back. "I don't need your protection." She bolted upstairs, leaving Peter with a sinking feeling he couldn't shake. Emily found him later, staring out the window. "She's growing up, Peter," she said softly. "We can't control everything." "Maybe," he muttered, "but I can't let her ruin her life." It was the last normal night they'd have. The calm before the storm was over, and Peter didn't even know it yet. Peter Crawford's world shattered on a gray Friday morning. He was still in his pajamas, sipping coffee and sketching bridge designs, when the doorbell rang. Sharp, insistent. Emily answered it, and before Peter could react, 2 police officers stormed into the kitchen, their boots thudding against the hardwood. "Peter Crawford?" One barked, hand on his holster. "Yeah, that's me," Peter said, standing confused. "What's this about?" "You're under arrest," the officer replied, pulling out handcuffs. "Allegations of abuse." Peter laughed, a short, incredulous burst. Abuse? You got the wrong guy. But then he saw them, Emily and Sophia, standing in the doorway. Sophia's face was streaked with tears, her arms wrapped around herself. Emily held her close, whispering something Peter couldn't hear. Tell them, Soph, he said, his voice cracking. Tell them this is a mistake. Sophia looked up, her eyes cold and unrecognizable. You hurt me, Dad. You know what you did. The words hit like a punch. What? I'd never. Enough. The second officer cut in, yanking Peter's arms behind his back. The cuffs clicked shut, cold metal biting into his wrists. He twisted to face Emily. Watch is happening. You know me. She wouldn't meet his eyes. It's over, Peter. We're done protecting you. Protecting him? His mind spun as they dragged him outside. Neighbors peeked through curtains, phones already out, recording his humiliation. In the patrol car, he replayed Sophia's words, searching for sense. Hurt her? He'd spent his life shielding her, bandaging scraped knees, cheering at soccer games, staying up late to help with homework. This was a nightmare. The trial was a blur of lies and theater. Sophia took the stand, her voice trembling but her story unwavering. He'd come into my room at night, she said, tears spilling. He'd touch me. I was too scared to tell anyone. Peter's lawyer, a harried public defender named Mark, scrambled to fight back. Your Honor, there's no evidence. Nothing physical, no witnesses. Just her word. The prosecutor smirked. Children don't lie about this. Peter stared at Sophia, begging her silently to stop. She avoided his gaze, clutching Emily's hand. Emily testified next, her voice steady. I suspected something for months. He was controlling, angry. I should have acted sooner. Controlling? Peter shouted, earning a gavel bang from the judge. I loved you both. Order. The judge snapped, his glare icy. Mr. Crawford, you'll have your turn. But his turn was a formality. Mark argued passionately. No bruises, no medical reports, no history of violence. But the courtroom had already decided. The judge's verdict came fast. Guilty. 10 years, Massachusetts State Prison. As they led him away, Peter caught Sophia's "I won last time." For a split second, he thought he saw guilt flicker there. Then she turned away. Prison swallowed him whole. The first night, a hulking inmate named Rico cornered him in the yard. Fresh meat. Rico sneered, slamming Peter against the wall. The beatings became routine, fists, boots, whatever was handy. Guards looked the other way. Peter learned to keep his head down, his mouth shut. But the real pain wasn't the bruises. It was the betrayal. His best friend, Dave, cut ties with a curt phone call. I can't know you anymore, man. His parents, who'd once bragged about their son's kindness, sent a letter. How could you, Peter? We're ashamed. Even his brother Tom, his rock since childhood, hung up when Peter begged for belief. You're dead to me, Tom said, voice flat. Work dried up. His firm fired him the day the news hit. The house went to Emily. The city branded him a monster. Alone in his cell, Peter clung to one question. Why? Why would Sophia lie? Why would Emily let her? He replayed their last fight, Zach's name, her defiance. Was this revenge for saying no? Day by day, the man he'd been slipped away. Gratitude turned to bitterness, love to rage. But deep down, a spark of defiance flickered. He wouldn't break. Not yet. 5 years into his sentence, Peter Crawford was a shadow of himself. Prison had carved lines into his face, hardened his eyes, and silenced the optimism that once defined him. Massachusetts State Prison was a gray hell of concrete and cruelty, daily beatings, sleepless nights, and the gnawing ache of betrayal. He'd stopped writing letters to Emily and Sophia after the first year. They never answered. His only lifeline was a faint hope that someday, somehow, he'd understand why his life had imploded. That hope flickered to life one humid afternoon in the prison yard. Peter sat alone on a rusted bench, nursing a bruised rib from Rico's latest greeting, when an inmate named Jimmy slid beside him. Jimmy was a wiry guy, all nerves and quick glances, serving time for theft. Heard something you might want to know, he muttered, eyes darting to the guards. Peter barely looked up. Unless it's a way out, I don't care. It's about your kid, Jimmy said. That Zach guy she ran with? He's been bragging in town. Says he fixed you good. Peter's head snapped up. Fix me. Jimmy nodded. Word is, he put her up to it. The whole abuse story. Revenge for you cock-blocking his game. A chill ran through Peter despite the sticky heat. Zach Davis. The name clawed at his memory. Sophia's defiance, their fight, her sudden accusation. Why would she listen to him? He asked, voice hoarse. Jimmy shrugged. Dunno, man. But he's got a rep for messing with girls' heads. Maybe she's scared or stupid. That night, Peter lay on his bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling. Zach as the puppet master made sense, but it didn't explain Emily. She'd backed Sophia's lie, sold it to the world. Why? He needed more. Weeks later, a battered envelope arrived. No return address, just his name scrawled in shaky ink. Inside was a note from John, an old co-worker who'd stayed loyal when others turned away. Peter, it read, I dug around. Emily forced Sophia to lie, threatened to leak compromising pics of her if she didn't. Zach was the spark, but Emily lit the fire. I'm sorry. The words burned into him. Pictures? Blackmail? Emily, the woman he'd loved for nearly 2 decades, had orchestrated his ruin. Sophia wasn't just a rebellious teen. She was a trapped one. Rage boiled up, but so did a cold, sharp focus. He wasn't broken yet. He had a fight left. Getting out became his obsession. Peter scraped together favors, extra kitchen shifts, a smuggled phone call to reach John. Find proof. He whispered into the receiver, voice low to dodge the guards. Anything solid. John came through months later. Another letter, got a recording. Sophia confessed to a friend, said Emily made her do it, threatened her with Zach's pics. I got it safe. Hang on. Peter clutched the paper like a lifeline. Freedom wasn't just a dream now, it was a plan. He leaned on his prison rep as a quiet survivor, avoiding trouble to shave time off his sentence. Parole hearings loomed, and with John's evidence, he had shot. Then, a twist he didn't see coming. Sophia retracted her accusation. No explanation, just a legal filing that hit the warden's desk. Peter was out in days, 5 years early, a free man at 45. He stepped into the sunlight, blinking at a world that had moved on without him. Emily and Sophia stood by the gate, faces pale, eyes wet. Sophia reached for him. Dad, He stepped back, voice ice. Don't. Emily tried next. Peter, we need to talk. You've said enough, he shot back, walking away. Freedom tasted bitter, but it was his. Later, at a rundown diner, he met John. Why'd she retract? Peter asked, sipping burnt coffee. John slid him the recording, a grainy audio of Sophia, voice trembling. Mom made me lie. She said if I didn't, she'd ruin me. I hate her for it. Peter's hands shook. Emily wasn't just complicit. She was the architect. Zach was her tool, Sophia her weapon. The why still stung, but the how was clear. He looked at John. I'm not done with them. John nodded. What's next? Justice, Peter said, his voice steel. The truth was out, but the war was just beginning. Peter Crawford stepped out of prison a free man, but the weight of 5 years lingered in his bones. At 45, he was leaner, grayer, and harder. Boston streets felt alien under a sky he'd forgotten. He didn't go home. There was no home left. Instead, he found refuge on a small farm outside the city, owned by a gruff couple, the Harpers. They'd heard his story, wrongly accused, betrayed, and offered him a job tending livestock. It wasn't engineering, but it was honest work, and Peter needed a restart. There, he met Kate Harper, their daughter. She was 38, sharp-eyed and kind, with a quiet strength that drew him in. Over late-night talks by the barn, he told her everything. Sophia's lie, Emily's blackmail, the prison hell. Kate didn't flinch. I believe you, she said simply, her hand brushing his. For the first time in years, Peter felt seen. With her beside him, a spark of hope reignited. But peace didn't last. 6 months into his new life, a summons arrived. Emily was suing him for back child support. 10 years' worth, claiming he'd abandoned Sophia while in prison. The audacity burned. They locked me up with lies, and now this? He raged, crumpling the paper. Kate squeezed his shoulder. We'll fight it. You're not alone anymore. Peter called John, who connected him with Richard Blake, a lawyer with a reputation for shredding opponents. Blake was a tall man, all angles and ice, his office a fortress of law books and steel resolve. This is a cash grab, Blake said, scanning the summons. But we got bigger ammo, your truth. Let's use it. They dug in. John's recording of Sophia's confession was gold, but Blake wanted more. He tracked down Zach Davis, now a petty crook bouncing between jail stints. Under pressure, Zach cracked. Yeah, Emily paid me to push Sophia. Said it'd teach Peter a lesson. Blake taped it, grinning like a wolf. This ends them. The courtroom buzzed as the trial began. Emily strode in, polished in a black suit, playing the wronged mother. Sophia trailed behind, head down, her hoodie hiding red-rimmed eyes. Peter sat with Kate and Blake, his heart a drumbeat of fury and nerves. The judge, a stern woman named Hargrove, eyed the room. Let's hear it, she said. Emily's lawyer opened with a sob story. Mr. Crawford failed his daughter, leaving her without support. He owes her. Blake stood, voice smooth as a blade. Your Honor, my client was in prison, falsely accused by the plaintiff and her daughter. How could he pay from a cell? Emily's lawyer faltered. He still had a duty. Duty? Blake cut in. Let's talk duty. Play the recording. The clerk hit play. Sophia's voice filled the room. Mom made me lie. She said if I didn't, she'd ruin me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then Zach's tape. Emily paid me to push her. Said Peter deserved it. Emily's face drained of color. That's fabricated, she cried, but her lawyer hushed her, frantic. Sophia shrank in her seat, tears spilling. Blake pressed on. We've got bank records, payments to Zach. This wasn't a scared mother protecting her child. It was a setup. Judge Hargrove leaned forward. Mrs. Crawford, explain. Emily stammered. I was protecting Sophia. He was controlling. Enough, Hargrove snapped. I've heard enough lies. She turned to Sophia. Young lady, speak. Sophia stood, trembling. I didn't want to. Mom said if I told the truth, she'd leak pictures Zach took, private ones. I was scared. Her voice broke. Dad, I'm sorry. Peter met her eyes, his chest tight. Sorry didn't erase the scars. You ruined me, Soph, he said quietly. Fear's no excuse. The room went silent. Hargrove rubbed her temples. This is a mess. We'll recess. I need to think. Outside, reporters swarmed. Emily spun her tale. He threatened us. But the crowd thinned, sensing her act crumbling. Kate pulled Peter aside. You okay? No, he admitted. But I will be. She's not winning this time. Back in session, Hargrove ruled. The child support claims dismissed. Mr. Crawford's conviction is under review. Mrs. Crawford, you and your daughter face perjury charges, serious ones. Emily sobbed, theatrical to the end. Sophia just stared at the floor. Peter felt no joy, only relief. The fight wasn't over, but he'd reclaimed his name. With Kate's hand in his, he walked out, ready for whatever came next. The courtroom air was thick as Judge Hargrove delivered her final ruling. Peter Crawford sat rigid, Kate's steady hand on his arm anchoring him. Across the aisle, Emily clutched Sophia, her face a mask of defiance crumbling into panic. The past months, tapes, testimonies, Zach's confession, had stripped their lies bare. Now justice loomed. Mrs. Emily Crawford, Hargrove began, voice like iron. You orchestrated a false accusation against your husband, blackmailed your daughter, and profited from his ruin. 8 years in state prison. Emily wailed, a rehearsed sob that fooled no one. Reporters scribbled furiously. The crowd murmured. Hargrove turned to Sophia. Miss Crawford, you're 17, a minor, but not blameless. 2 years in juvenile detention, then probation. You'll face the consequences. Sophia nodded, tears streaking her face, but said nothing. Peter watched her, a storm of emotions churning. She'd been his little girl once, giggles and soccer games. Now a stranger who'd torched his life. Hargrove looked at him. Mr. Crawford, your record's cleared. You're free. I'm sorry this happened. Free. The word felt hollow after 5 years of hell, but Peter stood, nodding. Thank you, Your Honor. As officers cuffed Emily, she lunged toward him. Peter, please. Tell them I didn't mean it. He stepped back cold. You meant every second. Live with it. Sophia reached out next, voice small. Dad, forgive me. I was scared. Mom made me. Scared doesn't undo what you did. He cut in, sharp but steady. You chose her over me. That's on you. She crumpled, sobbing as they led her away. Peter turned and walked out, Kate beside him, the weight lifting with each step. Outside, the world buzzed, cameras flashing, voices shouting. Mr. Crawford, how's it feel to win? A reporter yelled. He ignored them, pulling Kate toward the truck. His old life, family, friends, career, lay in ashes, but he wasn't looking back. The Harpers welcomed him like a son. On their farm, he rebuilt himself, feeding cattle, fixing fences, finding solace in routine. Kate became his rock, her belief in him a balm to old wounds. One night, under a starlit sky, he proposed. "I don't have much," he said, holding a simple ring. "But I've got you." She smiled, eyes shining. "That's enough." 3 years later, they were married, living in a cozy house on the farm's edge. Their daughter, Ella, was 2, blonde curls and fearless laughter. A son, Jake, arrived soon after, his cries filling the quiet mornings. Peter started a small engineering consultancy, sketching plans from shed-turned office. It wasn't the high-rise career he'd lost, but it was his, earned clean. Emily and Sophia faded from his world. Word came through John. Emily struggled in prison, her charm useless behind bars. Sophia, out on probation, wrote him once, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'll make it right someday." He didn't reply. His parents tried calling, guilt-heavy excuses about believing the child, but he cut them off. "You picked your side," he told his mother, voice flat. "Stay there." His brother Tom showed up once, sheepish on the porch. "I was wrong, Pete. Can we fix this?" "No," Peter said, shutting the door. Blood didn't mean trust anymore. The farm became his sanctuary, Kate and the kids his true family. Ella's giggles as she chased chickens, Jake's sticky hands tugging his shirt. Those were his victories. One evening, watching them play, Kate leaned into him. Happy. He kissed her forehead. "More than I thought I could be." Life wasn't perfect. Nightmares of prison lingered, and Sophia's face haunted quiet moments. But Peter had clawed his way back, through betrayal, through pain, to something real. Emily and Sophia had their punishment. He had his peace. Years later, a final letter came, Sophia's handwriting. "I'm trying to be better, Dad. I hope you're okay." He read it, then tossed it in the fire. "I am," he said to the flames, and meant it. The past burned away, and Peter Crawford lived on, free at last.